know him, Father David's well known in the diocese, archdiocese, but certainly in our diocese, because he has served as the spiritual advisor, is that the title? Spiritual advisor to the Antiochian women on the West Coast. So along with being a priest for 26 years, what'd you say? What's counting? I know, 14 days, it's 37 minutes now. So has served, grew up in Everett, Washington, and serves in Arlington, Washington, like 35 minutes from where he grew up, something like this. And a number of years ago, I went to his church and did a women's retreat for him. And this isn't payback or anything, it's just a good idea to have him. Father David is like a priest. We all kind of look to Father. We're kind of a group of priests that are like-minded and kind of act as like brothers for each other and really love each other. And it's funny, Father and I are like the old guard, but he's really actually the old guard. Yeah. The younger priest will ask questions like, well, when you do a baptismal liturgy, when do you do this or that? And both of us sort of let all the guys just knock it out, but occasionally one of us will pipe in with other things like, don't forget the importance of really loving your people or something, so I follow his lead, of course. But so, Father, we're really glad to have you. There's a million of these. He's got 10 grandchildren. His children are in his church. It's an amazing thing, to think of, for many of us, our families are not quite unified or whatever, and he really has brought his family along in the journey into Orthodoxy, which has been a long journey, and he pastored a couple of different churches in the Protestant world before coming into Orthodoxy, and it's good for us to be here today. I'm really glad all of you are here. One tiny little addition, and then I'll do kind of what happens today, just 1 second, and then give him the floor. There's this revival happening at Sarah Finlayson's college, and they had a prayer service. Maybe you've read about this or heard about this. They had a prayer service like a week ago. Saw on Facebook. They had a prayer service like a week ago, and it just sort of didn't end, right? It was like time to go back to class, and the Babylon Bee joked that they all had papers due. They're like, just stay in the church. But then basically it's like a never-ending prayer service teaching thing. So I've been asked about it. What do you think, Father? And I'm not there to see it, but we'll turn that off in just a sec. Shoot. Do you know where it is? It'll say silence alarms on the panel. It's like in the top row, alarm silence.
We don't have these kind of things.
Yeah, you don't have crime either, I'm sure. So, was asked about it kind of not really like the Orthodox perspective, but a little what do you have to say about that, Father? And was thinking about what happened this morning. That, the revival of the hearts and souls of our inner being. We do not need to travel to the college. You do not need to figure out how to get there, get an airplane ticket, get in line and get in there. You can if you want or something, but I wouldn't encourage it, because you've got, it's like going to the Holy Land. We're going to go to the Holy Land. All of us have to come back. When Jesus took the disciples up the Mount of Tabor and he was transfigured, he said, you may not build 3 booths. You may not camp out here. You've got to go back. And I was thinking, if this morning's service doesn't revive you, that's not a revival, and communion doesn't revive you, then it's time for a personal revival, dedication to Christ, prayer, confession, go all in. Don't hold back, And so this is the revival. And then they also apparently are having teaching, so we've got our teaching too. So anyway, with all that being said, last little thing, Father, we'll talk, we'll go over and have lunch, and then we'll come in for another session with Father, and the day will wrap up when he's done. So we'll be together for a little while today. So God bless all of you. Glad you're here. Sherry.
Can you say something real quick? So the guys are going to get our box lunches. So if we get done a little early, we don't, there's not
We'll have a break.
Just have a little break.
Yeah, we'll have a bathroom and talk, yeah.
They should be ready.
We are not rushing. Like you saw, like we're just here together. So with that, I'm going to stop dragging and Father, please. Thank you, Father.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. Christ is in our midst. You can tell my voice a little strained, and I'm sorry about that. I've been battling this for a long time. I'm actually going in to have a CT scan on Wednesday, trying to figure out what the heck's going on here. So, but I don't feel bad. I just sound bad, so I hope you can all hear me. Father James said he follows my lead, so now you're really in trouble. If that's the criteria, but I found out where the bad crew is. The stinkers are over here. It's a pleasure for me to be here, and you know, when I've been here on another occasion, and I was coveting, and now I came back, and now I'm coveting again. So our little church is on 2 city lots, right? We own 3 houses, but 2 city lots, nowhere for the kids to play, nothing, right? I mean, and it's a beautiful, I love our church, and it's a great place, but what you have here, I mean, the potential that you have here is incredible. I mean, really, truly, it's incredible. So it's a pleasure for me to be here. There was a contemporary priest, Father Nicodemus, in Athens several years ago. He was riding on a bus, and when he got on this bus, there were a group of anarchists on the bus, and they wanted to create all sorts of problems, and they immediately began to mock him. And he was dressed like I was. He had this on, he had his vest, had his hat, he was wearing white socks. He goes, "Look at you, please. You dress like this, you're just a fool." And he goes, "You got these stupid white socks, and we don't believe in your God." And he said, "You don't believe in my God?" They said, "No, we're anarchists." He says, "Oh, you're an anarchist?" He goes, "I'm an even bigger anarchist than you are." They go, "What do you mean by that?" He says, "When I want to eat, I fast. I don't allow myself to eat." He says, "When I want to go to sleep," he goes, "I stay up all night in vigil, in prayer." And he says, and I'll tell you a story of an even greater anarchist. Hi there. Wow. Somebody from Arlington. What the heck? You just moved down here?
We can talk later.
That's really funny. Okay, wow. Okay, wow. All right. Hey, yeah, it's all Hovik. Okay, yeah. Okay. Anyway, so he said, "I'm going to tell you about an even greater anarchist than me." And they go, "Well, who's that?" And so about the next 15 minutes or so on the bus, he talked to them about Jesus Christ. So there were 7 anarchists on this bus. They're all kind of listening to what he's saying. And finally, he got to his stop and he got off and he thought, well, I'll never see these kids again. So about a week later, they knew where he was a priest, and this young man comes and he's dressed very neatly, didn't look like anybody on the bus, and he goes, "Father Nicodemus." He goes, "Do you remember me?" And he goes, "No." He goes, I don't remember you at all." He goes, "Who are you?" He goes, "I'm one of the anarchists on the bus." And he said that he wanted to come for confession. And when he reflected on this, he said this kid had committed about every sin that it was possible to confess. And he began to come every week to him for confession. He'd hear his confession, he'd try to guide him. Now in Greece in those days, not everybody could hear confessions. They had a group of priests that could hear, they were confessors, and others that couldn't. And these priests would often travel around Greece and they'd hear other confessions. So the father told this young man, he said, I have to be gone for a few weeks. I have to go out and around the country and hear confessions. And when he got back, when he finished this confession tour, you might say, this young man never came back again. So he thought, well, odd, you know, he really started to enjoy this guy, and he felt like they were making some progress. But he had talked to him about Mount Athos. And so about 3 years later, Father Nicodemus goes over to Mount Athos, and he goes to the cave of St. Athanasius the Great. St. Athanasius was the founder of the first big monastery in Mount Athos, the Great Lava. It's still there. And Father Nicodemus goes into this cave where the original St. Athanasius lived to venerate his relics. And all of a sudden, this young monk, big long beard, comes out. He goes, "Father Nicodemus," he goes, "I can't believe you're here." You know, he's kind of taken aback. He doesn't even recognize who this person is. And he goes, "It's me," whatever his name was. He goes, "It's me." You know, so his name's Marcos. He goes, "Me, the anarchist." And he goes, "What?" And so he goes, please, Father, he goes, "You have to come to my cell." So he says, "Okay." So he goes, "Let me venerate the relics." He venerated the relics, and this monk brought him over to his cell. So he's going to make him some tea, and he's sitting down, he's making him tea, and as Father Nicodemus is sitting down, he looks up on the wall of this small cell, and he sees this icon of sorts, and it's an icon of a bus. And on this bus, there were several people, and here was this priest. And so he says to this young man, he goes, "What is this?" He was a little bit offended, like, "What kind of icon is this?" And he said, "What is that?" And he goes, "Oh, Father," he goes, "that is the greatest icon of all." He goes, "That bus is the monastery of my repentance." Okay, so if you're a monk or a nun, do you know Father Justin? Anybody here know Father Justin? Okay, so he has a daughter that's at the monastery, and he has a second daughter that's going to go to the monastery. So when you go to a monastery, and that's where you're taught, it's called the monastery of your repentance. So this guy was sort of making a play on that, but he was saying that it was on that bus, right? It was in that conversation with you that all of a sudden my heart became alive, and that I revived, and then I came to this place of repentance in my life. So I think what's important is, God responds to a heart that's open to him. And there were 7 people on that bus that were engaged in this conversation. But only one of them responded, right? His heart was open at that moment. So here you are. I recognize there's lots of options. You know where I live in Seattle? It's easy to have retreats. Oh, is that important? Okay. Well, it's your sump pump. Just unplug it. Just unplug it. Just the orange and black plug. Just right there. Orange. Just unplug it. Yeah. There you go. All right. But the heart's a mysterious thing. And so where I'm from, it's always cloudy, and so it's easy to have retreats. Here, it's sunny. You got lots of options, lots of things you can do. And for whatever reason,
Which is
you
why
chose.
we left Arlington.
What's that?
Which is why we left Arlington.
Yeah. No, I get it exactly. Yeah, I know. So it's conducive for church. But here you are. My point is that you have taken some time to come here and be a part of this retreat. So my prayer is that your heart will be open to what God has for you. I've had 6 surgeries on my hands. I get trigger finger. I don't know why I get it. But anyway, what happens is your finger locks down, and you have to like kind of force it out of place. But it begins to hurt. If all you had to do is snap it out of place, it wouldn't be a big deal. But it begins to hurt, and you can't grab things very well. So as a priest, holding a chalice, Okay, so when I had these surgeries, I was always wide awake. They would numb my hand, and I would be sitting like this. They'd have a little sheet right here, and the surgeon's over there, and I'm lying on there. I'm wide awake. We're having a conversation. I talked to a lady doctor, and we're always talking about orthodoxy, and it's just amazing. But the point is, she's making this incision, right, with a scalpel. And I could feel her make the incision, even though my hand was basically numb. I could feel when she was cutting things. I could feel when the nurse that was assisting her was blotting blood. So in one sense, an incision looks like a wound. I mean, it seems like this is a bad thing that's happening. And after the ascetic wore up, because what they do is they basically, even though this is what's affected, it's right down here where they make this incision. And so they make this incision. It looks like a wound. It actually feels like a wound. Because when you come out of the anesthetic on your hand, it really, really hurts a lot. So it seems like it's a kind of a bad thing that's happening when they go in, but the reality is, wow, all of a sudden you can move your finger again, and it doesn't hurt anymore. It's really a sort of a remarkable thing. So what I'm saying is that a surgeon's incision can look like a wound, and it can hurt like a wound. But in reality, that is the first step in me experiencing healing, or anybody that goes under any kind of surgery. So St. Porphyrios, in his book, Wounded by Love, he talks about how God's love for us compels him to perform spiritual surgery. Spiritual surgery, right? So the initial incision that God makes often looks like a wound. And it often hurts like a wound. Now, I'm talking about us trying to grow close to God, trying to understand who we are, try to understand what's preventing us from experiencing the kingdom of God in a deep way. So God makes this wound, and it hurts, but in reality, that's the first step in our healing. So I'm not athos. When you're a monk, a young novice, you have to learn obedience. And basically, it's probably the main reason that monks and nuns quit. Like, there's a reason that somebody is a novice for a long time. Up where we are, we have a monastery, and our abbess up there, Euronymous Eftrexia, you have to be a novice for 5 or 6 years. That's really a long time. So the question is, why is that, right? Because these young girls come, and they may be 18, 19, 20, because she wants to make sure you're not going to leave. Because for them, it's a terrible thing to take vows and then leave the monastery, okay? So the reality is, it's about obedience. So in this book, Wounded by Love, he tells a story about himself where he carved this beautiful little blackbird, right? It was just a beautiful carving. And he came back and he showed it to one of the monks. There's only 2 monks that he was with. And he says, who gave you permission to do this? Who gave you a blessing to carve this? And he goes, well, nobody. And he took it, he smashed it, and he threw it on the ground. Now, can you imagine all that work he put into that? It's destroyed instantly. So he goes to the elder there, and he explains to him what happened. And this elder was very kind. He said, you should never have done that, because you did not receive a blessing to do it. So that seemed kind of cringeworthy, right? Like, that's, what kind of an incision is that? You take this guy's work, this young guy, he's doing it out of the kindness of his heart, right? In theory, he's doing it out of love, and you just destroy it and throw it on the ground. See, so what's the point of all that? The point is that was the incision that was made. And he was trying to show the elder that he'd done something out of love, and the elder seemingly rejects this. So what was the point of all of that? He had to teach him a lesson. And the lesson was obedience. If you're going to be a novice in a monastery, you have to learn obedience. But my point is that incision that he made, right? That correction that he gave him, kind of harsh correction, seemed like a wound. But in the end, it's just like my doctor making an incision. It doesn't feel good, doesn't look good, but in the end, it produces fruit. So that's what we're talking about here. So when the disciples couldn't cast out the demon in Matthew 17, they couldn't figure out why they couldn't cast it out, and Jesus was able to cast it out. What does Jesus say to them? He says something that seems like a wound. He says, "Oh, faithless generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him to me." And of course, Jesus immediately cast out this demon. Right? So he sort of puts them down. He says, "What's wrong with you? What, you don't have any faith?" So that seems like a wound. It seems like, why would you treat somebody like that? But the point was an incision. Right? So then what's the lesson? Like, what's the healing that occurs as a result of Jesus making that kind of incision? And it was this, that these kind of things do not come out except by prayer and fasting. Right? So he's trying to teach them something. This is very important that you grasp this, because I'm going to leave, right? I'm going to depart from you. At some point, I'm going to ascend back to the Father, and you have to know what kind of battle you're going to be engaged in. These don't come out except by prayer and fasting. So it's an incision. It looks like a wound, but in John 21, Jesus confronts Peter, right? And he says, "Peter, do you love me?" "Oh, Lord, you know I love you." He says, "Do you love me?" "Or no, you know I love you." Then he asks him a third time, "Do you love me?" Now, that is hurtful. Right? Seems like, wow, why would you do this? Why could you just, wasn't the first one acceptable enough? Of course, the reality is he denied him 3 times, correct? So he had to reaffirm that 3 times. But my point in all this is that seems like a wound. It seems like Jesus is not being very nice here. He's not being the kind of comforting father that we picture perhaps in the last Sunday's gospel, where he runs out to meet this wayward son. Okay, but he was trying to help Peter be restored and understand about forgiveness. So in Mark chapter 9, Jesus and his disciples entered the house in Capernaum. And he says, "What were you arguing about on the road?" And of course, they were arguing about who was the greatest among them. So his confrontation was the incision. "What are we talking about? What are we talking about? This sort of thing on the road." And next, he sets them down, and what does he do? He gives them a lesson in humility, that the first must be last, and the last is going to be first. So in the life of Elder Joseph the Hesychast, Elder Ephraim talks about how, if you've ever, I hope you've read some things about Elder Joseph and about Elder Ephraim. But Elder Ephraim talks about how these young monks that came to Elder Joseph, when you read the life of Elder Joseph, you realize that he was one of the strictest monks probably that's ever lived on Mount Athos, and lived the most austere life of almost anybody that's ever been on Mount Athos. And hardly anybody could stay there. They would come, they'd stay there for a few days, they might stay there for a couple of weeks. They just couldn't bear how strict it was and how intense it was. But for those that stayed, he said every once in a while they'd come and they'd talk to Elder Joseph, and they would just be in some sort of delusion, and he'd just go, bang, right? Can you imagine that? Imagine if you're coming to me for confession. I just go, snap out of it, right? So that's an amazing thing. And he did that to all of them. So now, you know, on Mount Athos, they don't have very much property. But after 3 years, they exhume a body, correct? So if you're a monk and you die, they put you in the ground, they have a little grave marker. In 3 years, they take you up wherever you are. They put you in what they call a charnel house, an ossuary. You know, maybe it's a third of the size of this space here, depending on the monastery. I went to Vatopedi. It's a very funny story. I went to Vatopedi, and there was a monk there who had lived near me in a place called Bellevue, and Father Matthew. And he said, "You want to go with me? I'm going to light the candle in the charnel house where all the bones are." But as we walked out, here were all the bones. I mean, it was as long as this building, covered over with tin, and there were all the bones. There were skulls, you know, femurs and tibias, and so we're walking by, and he goes, "I like to think of these as my future roommates." Right? Yeah, but that's reality, you see. And the reason they were all outside is because they were remodeling this particular charnel house. And so the charnel house is a very important thing, and monks go down there and they pray, right? You say, what? Like, why would you go into a place full of bones and pray? Because you need to think about the fact that that's going to be you. You know, when you're my age, when you're your age, you don't even think about it hardly ever, right? When you're my age, you start thinking about it because you realize, short timer here. You ever played the tape measure game? This is a really fun game when you're your age. When you're my age, so you take a tape measure out and you put it to the average lifespan of a person. So for women it's 80 roughly, for men it's 79. And you put your finger on your age, then you look back and you look forward, right? Now there's no guarantee, right? You're gonna have that run there. But I'm telling you, when you're my age, baby, you're starting to think about it now. So, but the reality is, okay, so they exhume Elder Joseph the Hesychast's bones. Everybody wanted his right hand. See, all the brotherhood was going to take some of these relics with them where they went, correct? So that's why Elder Ephraim got the skull. That's why the skull, if you go to St. Anthony's, you're able to venerate. This is funny. I'm going to ask a question. How many of you are converts to Orthodoxy in this room? Okay, a lot of you, all right. So it's very funny, you know, because if you're not Orthodox, and you hear some of these stories, you go, what? So Father Paul Yaroslav and I, who's a great friend of mine over here, he's a priest in Ellensburg, Washington. We went to Mount Athos in 2005, and at the end we were in northern Greece, and we went to a place called Volos, and that's where this Euronymous Macrina is, and all of these abbesses that came to America to help start these monasteries were from that monastery. So anyway, we're there, and the very first day we're there, we had slept the night, we woke up, they go, come, come. So we go into the cell, in this little cell of Abbess Macrina, the founder who had reposed. They kept it just the way it was when she lived there. And they said, we want to bring out the greatest treasure that we have in the monastery. So I'm thinking, wow, the greatest treasure they have in the monastery. So they bring it out in this little box, they put it on the table, and they open it up. What is it? It's the skull. It's the skull of Euronymous Macrina. Now, if you're not Orthodox, you go, weird here. But when you realize that, once you realize that when you take the body and blood of Christ, correct, it permeates every fiber of your being, right? Which is why we don't cremate, right? That's why the Orthodox Church does not cremate, because the body and blood has coursed through every part of you, including your bones, correct? So anyway, it was very funny, you know, like here's the greatest treasure, and it was a beautiful treasure. But my point is, they all wanted the hand of him. Now it seemed like, right? Maybe that was mean, like that was a wound, like he was slapping on the side of the head, like knock it off. But it wasn't a wound, right? It was an incision, because of spiritual surgery, because they had to understand that wherever they were at that moment was something that was not a healthy place to be. So my guess is that passages from Scripture and teaching from the fathers and shortcomings that your parents or your spouse, or even like Father James, some of his homilies, they just may seem like wounds. You say, why are you preaching this kind of sermon? Why are you talking about these things, right? But you need to understand that in the spiritual life, these things are not wounds, right? These things are incisions, and sometimes it's the person that is in the worst shape that incision hurts the worst, right? Because they're in great need of healing. But if you take a step back, and if you look at these things in your life that happen, it's because God is trying to perform some kind of spiritual surgery on you. All right, so the first step then in the process of healing in a particular area in your life, don't mistake an incision for a wound, because they're two different things. Elder Emilianos spoke about unforeseen events in our life that cause us to be upset or to flee a situation or even to be filled with anxiety. He says they're only unforeseen from our perspective, right? Nothing's unforeseen from God's perspective, right? And they're unwanted because we want to orient everything around our will. We want our life to hover around what we want to do and what we think makes sense for us and how we think an Orthodox Christian life should unfold. But God has a very different plan. So, if you can come to this place where you have confidence in God, like where you believe that God is in control of everything. 3.5 years ago, I stepped into a house, and in this house was no floor. And when I tell people this story, they go, "Well, didn't you look?" I said, "When's the last time you opened a door and looked to see if there was a floor?" You don't do that. But our church is remodeling this house. They tore out the floor. I was with another man. We're going to get a ladder. Father David Summer, who helped, came down, Heather did this work here. We're going to put some icons up in our church. I opened the door. I stepped down 4 feet. My leg went like that. Now, I didn't know that. The guy behind me said he almost passed out and fell into the hole with me when he saw it happen to my leg. I shattered my femur. My leg just went, and I said to him, I was just standing on my left leg. I go, "Chris, I do not know what's happened, but I cannot feel my leg from my knee down." It was just like jello, just wobbling, right? Oh. So the shocking thing was I wasn't in very much pain. So I was in shock, right? I mean, that's what had happened. But anyway, he lifted me out of the hole and all that. Now here's the whole deal. Through all of that, I'm not telling you I'm some paragon of virtue now. And I'm not telling you that I don't ever question things. I'm not, that's not true. But for whatever reason, in this particular situation, I just thought, okay, God, you've allowed this. I don't know why you've allowed this. I mean, I couldn't bear weight for 12 weeks. I had to have a buddy of mine, Father James Bernstein, come out of retirement. He just retired. I said, "Sorry, buddy, you're back in the saddle again." And it took me, probably 4 months before I could actually serve liturgy again. And my leg it'll never be the same. If you look at my foot, you say, "You're mighty pigeon-toed." Well, I was always a little pigeon-toed, but after that surgery, I am mighty pigeon-toed. And it's difficult walking downstairs, So, but what I'm getting at is, if you can come to the place in your life where you realize whatever God allows. I'm here with Father James, and Father James just lost one of his best friends in the world. And, he got a little choked up. I don't know why he got choked up, but I'm thinking maybe, he get a little choked up at that baptismal service because he's thinking about his friend and that sort of thing. And yeah, these are all, so it doesn't mean you're not going to have human emotion. I'm not talking about that. But what I'm saying is, you need to come to the place where you believe that God is in control of all these things. And so if somebody you love passes away, if some unforeseen incident occurs, if some great blessing comes out, we always think that's God. If something wonderful happens, and something we perceive as not wonderful, but maybe the thing we perceive as not wonderful is as wonderful as the thing we recognize as wonderful, because God is trying to do something in our life. Okay, so I want to talk to you about one such encounter. This is a very great story, one of my favorite stories in all the writings of the Fathers. St. John Cassian and his friend Germanus had lived in the West in Rome. They had talked to all these monastics, and they were very unsatisfied with what they saw happening in the spiritual life of these monastics. So they thought, we're going to go to the east, we're going to So the heart of monasticism in those days was in Egypt, right? A place called Sketis. And they had talked to all these spiritual fathers, and all of a sudden they saw Moses the Ethiopian. Now, have you anybody read much about the life of St. Moses? Really, one of the greatest saints in the life of the church. So I'm just giving you a quick thumbnail sketch here. Moses was a monster of a guy, and he was a powerful person. He was a slave, and his slave owner said, "Get out of here," because this guy caused so much trouble, he couldn't control him at all. He gave him the boot. He founded a band of robbers. There were 75 of them. Moses had committed every sin he could possibly commit. He was basically a terrorist, and he terrorized people. So at one point, they had committed a crime. They were running to escape the authorities, and they came to this monastery. And in this monastery, Moses came in, and he confronted the abbot. He didn't want to do any harm to the abbot, but he just wanted to let him know, we're here, and we're staying here, we're going to hide. And this abbot was absolutely unflinching. Like, Moses couldn't believe it. Like, he just was not afraid of Moses at all. This impending, like, you know, your deacon's pretty big. We've got a deacon called the Deacon Vasily Hinkle. And I mean, he is humongous. Like, he's about 6'6" and 330 pounds. But Moses was even bigger than that. Like, Moses was maybe like 6'7", and But this abbot didn't flinch. And so Moses stayed there. And all of a sudden he began to look at the life of the monastery and look how these monks lived. And something happened inside of him, right? It's very interesting. Because you had these 75 monks, just like you had these 7 anarchists on a bus, and one responded. You had these 75 monks, and Moses and just a handful of the monks decided, we want to stay here. The rest of them took off, and they continued to live their barbarous ways. But Moses was, the abbot didn't want to receive Moses at first, because he thought, man, this guy is not ready to be here. And, but the monk, Father Isidore, he said, no, I think you ought to receive him. So the abbot says, okay. He says, if I receive him, he's yours, right? You're in charge of him. You're going to have to disciple him. Okay, so he accepts that. So Moses had all sorts of problems, but one of his big problems was with lust. He just, how do I overcome this? And so, water is scarce, kind of like living in Arizona, I suppose, without all this infrastructure. And at night, when all the other monks were asleep, Moses would put these buckets on his shoulder. He'd go down, he'd fill them up with water, he'd come back, and he'd fill all the water buckets of the old monks that lived there. Now, my point is, he's trying to be tough on himself, you see. So, to make a long story short, I don't want to go too much in the life of Moses, but at one point, he was going to leave the monastery. Like, when you think about your life as an Orthodox Christian, sometimes you struggle and you go, gosh, am I making any progress at all? Like, what is going on here? So he talked to Isidore, and he said, I want to leave. It's not working. So Isidore says, come on. He says, come with me. He says, we're going to go out. So they went out. It was pitch black, and they sat on this little knoll. There was not too many hills there. And they just waited for the sunrise. And so let's suppose here's the crest of the hill, right? And he said, all of a sudden, that first ray of light kind of pierced the horizon. Didn't say anything. Second ray of light, third ray of light. Finally, Isidore turns to Moses, and he said to him, do you see how the sun slowly dissipates the light? Right, just one step at a time. He says that's how it is for us in the spiritual life. He says that God slowly helps us to overcome sin. And eventually, we come to a place where we're healed. Okay, now we're going to jump way ahead. So Moses not only experienced healing, but Moses became an abbot of a monastery. He had 75 bandits. He had a monastery of 75 people, kind of ironic. But not only that, Moses became perhaps the most renowned figure of his era in terms of spiritual guidance. So now John Cassian and Germanus see Moses in Skeet. They've talked to all these other people. They want to talk to Moses. So they asked him to spend some time with him. He said, no, I'm not interested. And with tears, right? John Cassian says, no, we pleaded with him. He said, please, we've come a long way. We want to talk to you. And he said, no, I'm not interested. And finally, they just beseeched him. He said, okay. He said, fine, I'll talk with you. So their first question was, why do you want to talk with us? Like, we've come all this way, you don't want to talk with us. He said, because I have so many people that come, and they want to talk. They just want a word from me. but they never listen to what I say. They never apply what I say. And so they said, no, that's not us. I mean, we are serious, and we are going to listen. We're going to hang on every word you say. Okay, so Moses got straight to the point, and he began to ask them a question. And here's what he said. He said, children, all virtues and all pursuits have a certain, here's the key phrase, immediate purpose. And those who look to this purpose and adapt themselves accordingly will reach the ultimate goal. So now we got two things going on here. The immediate purpose and the ultimate goal. This is critical for us in this women's retreat now. He explained that a farmer, right, works diligently. He works the earth, he endures the sun's heat and the winter's cold. And what's his immediate purpose? The immediate purpose, he says, is to clear all the thorns, is to clear all the land. My grandfather immigrated from Norway to out just outside of Arlington, a little place called Marysville, the Schultes Road. And he bought 90 acres, and they were all covered with fir trees, right? And how do you get rid of fir trees? Well, he immigrated in the 1800s. You know how you get rid of fir trees? You cut them down, and then you get a big horse, and then you got to pull the stumps up. And can you imagine trying to clear 90 acres of land by hand? But his point here is that the farmer, right, his immediate purpose is to clear all of this out, because what's the goal? The goal is once he plants and he harvests, he's able to enjoy the fruits of his labors. He said a merchant, ignoring the dangers of land and sea, willingly gives himself to his business with a purpose. And what's the purpose? The purpose is, I want to make a profit. What's the goal? I want to enjoy life. I want to enjoy the profit I'm going to make from this. And then he says a soldier actually has this purpose, right? They're trying to conquer a certain area. He's trying to impress the generals. He's trying to rise in rank, right? That's the purpose. And what's the goal? He wants to enjoy the advantages of having done well and getting a higher rank. Okay, so now our pursuit of Christ, he says, also has an immediate purpose. It has an ultimate goal for the sake of which we are willing to endure all of this toil and suffering. Sort of like coming to a women's retreat. A lot of other things you could be doing, right? But you're sort of maybe enduring the toil of having to listen to me talk to you. But the point is, he says to them, right? Now they're monks. He's a monk. He's talking to monks. But what he says is, the fast don't cast us down. The hardships of vigils and of his long services actually delight us. Reading and the study of scriptures are readily undertaken. The physical work, the obedience, the stripping of oneself from everything earthly is carried out with pleasure. He says, so you two right here, John Cassian and Germanus, he says, you have given up your country, you've given up your families, you've given up everything worldly, and you've come to this foreign place, right, to seek guidance, and here you're talking to me. He says, tell me, what is your purpose? What's the immediate purpose of the Christian life? And he says, and what goal did you set before yourselves in doing all of this? And so here's what they said. They said, well, we did all this for the kingdom of heaven. We did all this so we can spend eternity with Christ. And Moses said, very clever. He says, you've told me the goal. He goes, what is the immediate purpose of the Christian life? Now I'm telling you, this is one of the most important things you'll hear out of my lips today. Because when you talk to people, Orthodox people, always talk about the goal, eternity, what it is. But it's, what's the immediate purpose of the Christian life? And when you read the writings of St. John Cassian, he said of all the people he met, nobody talked to him like Moses. Nobody was straightforward like Moses like this. So what's the immediate purpose of the Christian life? He says the immediate purpose of the Christian life is the purification of the heart. And he says without the purification of the heart, no progress whatsoever can be made in the spiritual life. Okay, now, nobody spoke to us like Moses did. That's an incision. Now, it may feel like a wound, right? Even him saying, I don't want to talk to you at the beginning. I don't want to talk to you, right? That may seem cruel to him. But he's trying to make a point even then, right? Like, if I'm going to talk to you, if you're going to take my time, then you better be serious about this. this, right? Because I could be seeking God instead of just wasting my breath, okay? So I'm not going to accuse you of any of that, correct? But the point is, I suppose I could just be wasting my breath. I could have flowed down here. But, in my head, I'm thinking, no, we've got some people like this anarchist on this bus. Right? We have some people whose hearts get touched because they're open to Christ. But the purification, that's the issue. So, and when he asked them that question, they said, we don't know. We don't know what the immediate purpose is. And he explained to them, it's the purification of the heart. Okay, so this is why this topic is of utmost importance. And for you, you've got to somehow in the back of your minds, in the forefront of your minds, always keep this purpose in front of you, right? It's the purification of our heart, or the purification of our nous. So Moses said, should it ever happen, now think about this for a minute, should it ever happen that for a short time our heart turns aside from this direct path, from realizing we have to be purifying our heart, we must bring it back again at once, guiding our lives with reference to this purpose, as if it were a carpenter's rule. Like, this is the guide for us. So the Apostle Paul, listen to what the Apostle Paul says in Philippians 3. He says, forgetting what lies behind and reaching forward to the prize that lies in front, I pursue my purpose. Aha, what lies in front, there's the goal. But he says, I pursue my purpose. What's that? Purification of his heart. Aiming at the prize of the high calling of God. So our focus, the immediate purpose of our life in Christ, is the purification of our nous. It doesn't happen overnight. Father Seraphim Rose said that by taking one small step at a time, and not thinking that in any one leap we're going to get into the kingdom of heaven or get anywhere, we can actually walk straight into the kingdom of heaven, and there's no reason that any of us have to fall away from that. Okay. So the goal of the kingdom of heaven then is to experience union with Christ in this life. So it's like the farmer clearing out the thorns and the weeds, and the merchant giving himself up over all this hard work, the soldier executing this plan. No progress can be made in the spiritual life without you purifying your heart. St. Paisios talks about doing things, I love this. Christ. Things that attract the grace of God to us, and things that repel the grace of God to us, right? The bee and the fly story. That story, he says, you fill a room full of garbage, you got one flower over in a corner. He says, a bee will come into this room filled with garbage, he'll bypass all of it, and he'll find that flower over in the corner. But he said, you fill a room full of flowers, and you have one little bit of garbage in a corner. He says, a fly will come in, he'll bypass all those flowers, and he'll land on that bit of garbage. Now, that's really a great lesson for us. So you think about your life, about your speech, about your thinking patterns. And St. Paisios says we can do things that actually attract the grace of God to us. But simultaneously, we can do things that repel the grace of God. So what does that mean for us as clergy and laity? So St. Moses addresses this very issue in his response to St. Germanus. He said, we do everything for the sake of this immediate purpose, right? Which is the purification of our nous. All right, so my point is, ouch. That seems like an incision, or it seems like a wound, but it's actually an incision. So Moses and a monk, he was speaking to these two monks. He continues, he says, we give up our country, our family, our possessions, everything worldly in order to acquire purity of heart. And he says, and if we forget this purpose, and believe me, it is easy to forget, that the purpose of this life is the purification of our heart. We cannot avoid frequently stumbling and losing our way. So here's the challenge, right? You come into the Orthodox Church, these people are baptized, they're newly illuminated, it's fantastic. You get this blast of the grace of God, and it really is wonderful and legitimate, it's all of that. But after you've been Orthodox for a while, you can begin to lose sight of that. In your life, you just sort of go back to the mundane life that you lived, and you forget about sort of cultivating, protecting the grace of God. And what he's saying is that we have to be very careful about that, right? Because if we don't have this goal in front of us, kind of like the carrot on a stick, and if we can't see that, then it is very easy for us to fall. And he says we're going to enter into this dark path, we're going to stumble, we're going to stray, and the point is what? We'll begin doing things that repel the grace of God, instead of doing things that are actually attracting the grace of God. So I want to read you a great verse. It's really one of the most important verses, I think, in all the New Testament. I don't know how you prioritize these things, but at least from the perspective of what we're talking about today. This is Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. It's not unreasonable to ask you to give your all to God. But verse 2 is what I want to focus on. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Aha. So I'm going to grab a piece of paper. I want to show you something. Do not be conformed to this world. Because the world has a very definite shape that it wants to put you. It wants you to think like it. It wants you to react like it. It wants you to have its priorities. And the Apostle Paul says, don't do that. Do not be conformed to the world. Don't let the world squish you into whatever mold it has in mind for you. He says, instead, you have to be transformed, right? We have to sort of get back to the original intent of what we were meant to be. Be transformed. I'm just going to, there you go. That's a souvenir. He said, I want you to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. But what does it say in the Greek? In the Greek it says, I want you to experience a metamorphosis by the reconstruction of your news. Wow, what? What does that even mean? Because I read that verse and I think, by the renovation of my mind, like, okay, so I see, so whatsoever is good and lovely and of good report, I guess I'll think on these things, I'll read good books. But no, that's not what he's saying. He says, you need to reconstruct your news. So a metamorphosis is like a butterfly, right? It's like a caterpillar. And it spins this cocoon, and all of a sudden, when it works its way out of that cocoon, it's just this beautiful creature. So this is what we're saying. In the purification of the heart, it enables a person to actually experience that kind of metamorphosis. In fact, it's part of this metamorphosis that causes us to become this beautiful butterfly. But he says it occurs by the reconstruction, the renovation of your news. I was talking to Father James about this building and look at all, what you've got going on and future plans and all of that. We are right in the midst of reconstruction in our church. And so we're adding on. We have a big transept out this way, and we're adding a parallel one out this way, and we're adding onto our fellowship hall. And we've got sheetrock dust everywhere, and it's just a big mess. Okay, but that's how it goes. I mean, if you're going to renovate something, it takes a lot of work. So that's the word the Apostle Paul uses now. He says you have to renovate your news. Don't be conformed to this world. Okay, so what's the news? We talk about that a lot. St. John of Damascus writes that the nous is the purest part of the soul. It's the eye of the soul. But the nous is not separate from the soul. So your nous, we use the word heart, is part of your soul. So what's the soul? Okay, I don't want to get too complicated. Let's just say the soul is your intellect, it's your emotions, it's your will. That's what a soul is. Your intellect, your emotions, and your will. And the nous is kind of the heart of this. It's kind of the eye of this, the critical thing of this, right? So he says, St. John says, as the eye is to the body, so is the nous to the soul. So without getting too technical, right? The heart is the essence of the soul, and it has thoughts and conceptual images, and they're the energy of the soul, okay? So when we speak of renovating the nous, we have to understand that we talk about heart and nous interchangeably, and oftentimes the fathers, they mean the same thing. So listen to what Jesus says. He says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Now, we do something that most Antinomian churches don't do, but because our people love it, we just do it. And that is we sing the Beatitudes on most Sundays. So for us, the antiphon, when we come out at the entrance, is the Beatitudes. And I love it so much. And so you're always hearing, blessed are the pure in heart, blessed are the pure in heart. But it's important to understand that God has revealed in the heart, and there it's in the heart that people come to know God. This is very important for us as Orthodox Christians. Because if you come from an evangelical background, you know, faith comes from hearing and hearing the Word of God and sola scriptura, and it's all about memorizing Bible verses and be able to quote them, and you're thinking about it, and if you have the right thoughts and the right belief, if you just believe that God died for our sins, and if you just believe that Jesus resurrected him from the dead, you're saved. Well, wait a minute now. It's not that the mind isn't involved, right? I mean, the mind, the thinking process is involved. But the fathers always talk about how we engage God in the heart, in the nous. Elder Amelia knows. He says there are many people that know about God. There are few that know God. Now, I think that's true in my parish. I think that's true in your parish. Maybe you're among the elite group that actually knows God. But he says many, many people know about God. But not many people actually know God. So the question is, where do we know God? How do we know if we know God? And the answer that the fathers give us, consistently is that we begin to know God in our heart. So the Apostle Paul, he underscores this in 2 Corinthians 4. He says, "For it is the God who commands light to shine out of darkness, who has shown in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ." St. Paul in Ephesians chapter 1, he says that the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of glory, may give you the spirit of wisdom and revelation in the knowledge of him, the eyes of your understanding being enlightened, that you may know him. Okay, so the point in all this is that our hearts receive this revelation, the knowledge of God. But what if the heart isn't purified? So this is the issue. God wants to reveal himself to us. He wants to reveal himself in our heart. It's how we perceive God, how we connect with God, how we come in union with God. And yet if the heart is not purified, how do we receive that revelation? Or if the heart is only partly purified, is that revelation somehow muddled and we don't have an accurate understanding of who God is or what he's trying to accomplish? So I'm sure Father James has talked about this over and over and over again, but purification, illumination, deification, right? You know those three stages? Purification, illumination, deification. Every one of us is at this stage right now. We're trying to purify our hearts, trying to purify our nous. When a person begins to purify their nous, it doesn't have to be perfect now, but when a person begins to purify their nous, all of a sudden, they begin to understand things more clearly. They begin to understand the scriptures more clearly, the readings of the fathers more clearly. Maybe they actually even understand homilies more clearly, the gospel readings more clearly, because there's a certain illumination that's occurring, like an enlightenment is occurring. And then the fruit of that, if you continue in that, because we're always purifying, is deification. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the eye of our soul, the nous, if it's darkened through sin, our entire soul is affected. So I want you to understand that. So the soul is the intellect, the soul is the emotions, the soul is the will. If I have an enlightened nous, wow, my intellect's enlightened, right? My emotions, my will, they're all altered. But if I move away from the grace of God, if I do things that repel the grace of God, if my soul, even after I'm Orthodox now, right? These newly illumined people, if they don't guard that, what happens is then, gosh, my intellect becomes darkened. And what happens with an intellect that's darkened? And that's coupled with emotions that are darkened and a will that's darkened. You ever hang out with people that are always critical? Is there anybody like that? I know, God. And you say to yourself, how can you live your life like this? How can everything be terrible? How can everybody be bad? How can you always be gossiping? How can everything be so negative? Right? But if we just stand back and just from a Orthodox perspective, try to assess this person, well, it's pretty easy diagnosis. Their nous is dark. I'm not saying they're not Christian now. I'm just saying that something's happened to their nous. And it's affected every part of their being. It's affected their intellect, their emotions, right? Their will, they're stubborn. No, I'm not going to give in. Like, suppose you offended somebody. And you actually need to go and apologize to that person and maybe do a prostration and say, please forgive me. And then, no, they did it first. And, wow, okay, black, right? I mean, so this is what we're talking about now, I want to get down to the need. I'm assuming we're friends, so I'm going to talk to you like we're friends. So Matthew 6:23, Jesus said, if your eye is bad, your whole body, it's about your soul now, your whole body is full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? So the natural movement of the noose is towards God. But what's happened, sin's come along, it's caused us to move away from God. And the fruit of that, according to the fathers, are the following: corruption, darkening, blindness, indifference, insensitivity, bondage, captivity, illusion, defilement. So I want to look at it from this perspective. When I drive to the monastery by us, you never see wild horses anymore. You know the song, Wild Horses? But anyway, we actually have wild horses in Washington, and it's on the Yakima Indian Reservation. So I'm driving to Golden Dale, and I'm just about to hit Sadis Pass, which is right almost where the monastery is, and the Yakima Nation owns all this. Here's all these wild horses. Just awesome to see these horses running around. But so here's what happened to us in the fall. It's very important. This is the horse, okay? Here's the horse, and here's the rider. And the rider has reins, and the bit is in the horse's mouth, and the rider, which is the noose, and the horse, which is the soul, right, are being controlled. And so the noose says, let's just do a horse analogy: giddy up, whoa, left, right, trot, stop. He's in control because he's got the reins and he is enthroned on that horse. But when the fall occurred, here's what happened. That guy got bucked off, and that horse began running around doing whatever it wanted to do. Okay, now this is your soul. This is your soul. This is very important what I'm about to tell you. Because when you try and figure out what is the Christian life about, is it just coming to hear Father James preach? I mean, what is this? No, the goal of the Christian life is to get that rider back up on the horse. Get him back up on the horse. Get the soul back up in control. The noose back up in control of the soul. Because when the soul is running around doing whatever it wants to do, it's giving no thought of God. It's not oriented towards God. And so it's chaos. That's what ensues. So now here we are at a women's retreat. We're trying to figure out how do I purify my heart. And I'm telling you that the ultimate goal here is I've got to get this noose in me that's been affected by the fall, that's been darkened because of sin. I have to enlighten that, right? And by enlightening that, all of a sudden, I'm re-enthroning the noose on the horse. I'm reinstalling the bit. I'm grabbing the reins. I'm going to say, no, you can't go this way. You can't go that way. So it's like the Lenten fast, right? And everybody first week, oh, great, it's Lent, I can hardly wait. And then the third week of Lent, what a stupid monk thought this fast. I mean, you can hardly believe that, it's been 6 weeks, 7 weeks of this. What? Okay. But the point is, that just shows you that what's in control. And what's in control is your soul. What's in control is your will that wants to do what it wants to do. It doesn't want to do what the church tells it to do, because the church ultimately knows how to heal your soul. Okay, so if you try to throw a rope around a wild horse, what do you think is going to happen? Oh, baby, that thing's going to go crazy. I mean, you're going to try and tie that thing down. You see those old cowboy movies where somebody gets up and they ride around for 30 seconds. All of a sudden, the horse is broken. It doesn't work that way. It takes a long time to break a horse. And you know what? It takes a long time to break your soul. Because you're a wild horse, and I'm a wild horse, and Father James is a wild horse. And we're all running around doing what we want to do. We come in contact with the Orthodox Church. We come in contact with these terms we've never heard of before. We begin to think about what does a noose even mean. We begin to try and obey and incorporate the life of the church in our life. And what's happening? We're trying to buck it off. We hate this stuff, right? But ultimately, this is the thing that leads to healing. Okay, so Proverbs 21:2. Every way of a man is right in his own eyes, and that's how an untamed soul rolls, right? Because it wants to do what it wants to do. So you enter the Orthodox Church as a catechumen, Or maybe you come in baptism even and you're not really sure, you think you've gone through catechism, you think you sort of understand what's going on, then all of a sudden you just kind of find yourself beating your head against a brick wall. I'm assuming that if your priest is a good catechist, he has warned you about these things and you're perhaps prepared for some of these falls. But I think, for me, if I know something's coming, I can prepare myself for it pretty well and I'm not too affected. But if something hits me out of the blue, right, like, wow, I mean, how do you prepare for something like that? So you just have to have confidence. The church has been doing this for 2,000 years. Like, the church actually knows how to heal you. It knows how to heal your marriage. It knows how to, and you know what? Healing your marriage may be you. See, so the thing is, you may think, yeah, become Orthodox, and maybe my spouse will actually get their act together. My dumb husband will start figuring out how to be because you think it's your husband, right? But it may be you. See, maybe you. And he can hardly face that because you've built this whole scenario. So it's his fault. He's him. It's the man you gave me, right? Just like Adam said, it's the woman you gave me. But the reality is, we come into this encounter with Christ, and we're so messed up, and our logic is so distorted that we don't actually even know what normal looks like. We're used to abnormal. And so when we live this abnormal life, Frank is done being funny. You live this life, this abnormal life that seems normal to us. We encounter the church that says, hey, we can really give you healing. Sometimes it actually is scary when we confront the things that the church asked us to do. Okay, so how do you fast? How do you pray? How do you confess? How do you overcome your passions? It's all a process. And the ultimate goal is we're trying to experience theosis. We're trying to experience a metamorphosis. So Jesus links, the Father's link the purification of your heart, blessed the pure in heart, with the verse I gave you from Romans 12. Blessed are the pure in heart, be not conformed to this world, but experience of metamorphosis by the renovation of your news. So what the Fathers is saying is that the purification of your heart is completely linked to the renovation of your news, the reconstruction of your news. And that's what we're here to try and accomplish today. So there's lots of words we could use about, we talk about essence and energies and the news and theosis, and all these things are kind of foreign to us, but they're really a critical part of what we're trying to accomplish as Orthodox Christians. So I'm going to stop because I think a person can talk and not have any questions. So let's just stop for a second, and if you have any, you need some clarification. So I'm just trying to set the stage now for how you're going to actually start purifying your heart. So is what I said so far made sense, or is it confusing? Okay. Anything? You're all good? All right. Okay.
One question. What
Yep.
was the third word? Purification. It was PD and.
Purification, illumination,
Okay.
yeah, and deification. Or what's another word for deification? Theosis. Yeah, exactly. Right. So that's the ultimate. And when you first come in the Orthodox Church, you're first exposed to it. These things are all confusing. So when I took Hebrew, I went, "What do you mean there's no vowels?" Like, you ever took Hebrew? Oh man, what? You gotta be kidding me. So it is like learning a new language, and I get that, right? And the ultimate goal is theosis. And here's one of the challenges, I think. You can read these books in the lives of these saints, and it just seems like, wow, what? But what you don't get is you don't get the struggle. So I'm going to tell you a really great book that I highly recommend you read. It's by elders, by now Saint Sophrony. Okay? And it's We Shall See Him as He Is. And the reason we shall see Him, we shall see Him. I know, I'm the same way. Just take your time. Right here. We shall see Him as He is. That's by Saint Sophrony. And what's important about this book, from my perspective, is that he actually tells his life story. And so Saint Sophrony is really a very revered contemporary saint. He was only canonized a few years ago. But he tells the story about when he was a young man. Because the problem is, if all you do is read his writings, And you see the end of his life, and he's the abbot of the monastery over in Essex, England. You go, well, how did he get there? But this book kind of tells you how he got there. So in his life, when he was 18, he was a great artist. He was born in Russia. He was a great artist. 1917, just before the revolution, he was sent to Paris to go to the Paris Art Institute to study art because he was so gifted. When he got there were hardly any Orthodox there. It's kind of a bohemian community, the art community, and he got way off track. So he'd raised in the Russian church, raised in Russia. And he begins to get involved in TM and gurus and just all this stuff, meditation, etc. And it says for 8 years he was involved in that kind of pursuit. And all of a sudden, one day he was in his apartment, and he just had this just overwhelming, he just realized, oh my gosh, I've just wasted I'm trying to become one with the universe, right? He goes, I just realized I've wasted 8 years of my life. And he cried out to God. He just had this really a dramatic experience. I mean, you almost want to call it a reconversion, but just this incredible experience. But he says, and he wrote this book when he was 88 years old, so he was an old man reflecting on his life. I think he lived to be about 93 or 94. But he said, when I look back on my life, I never forgotten those 8 years. And what a shame that was, and how I shamed Christ with all that. Now, that may seem like something you don't want to hear about. That's something I want to hear about, right? When I read a book, I want to know what this person did. How did he get from point A to point B, and B to C, and C to X, and X to Z? I mean, how do you get there? And that's what that's what I want to help you try to understand in this retreat here, is that there's actually a path that we can take that will get us there. And sometimes that path is very painful. You know, Father Seraphim Rose, have you read his life story, any of you? Big, thick book, so maybe a lot of you haven't read it. But when you read his life, you know, he was involved in all sorts of crazy stuff. He got involved in homosexuality. But one night he was just drunk as a skunk. He was on the streets of San Francisco. Remember that TV show? He was on the streets of San Francisco. He was just hammered. He just cried out to God, God, right? Bam. God just met him there, just like pow. And eventually he discovers the Orthodox Church, and he makes his way, he becomes a monk, he becomes a priest monk. So, but my point is, if all you know is Seraphim Rose after he's already become a monk and a priest monk, you don't understand the journey, you don't understand the struggle. And so one of the things I want to encourage you in is this: do not feel bad if you're struggling. Don't feel bad if you feel like you're not making any progress. Because we all feel that way. Because it really is a great struggle. And one of the things that Satan wants to do is discourage you. He doesn't want you to continue on this path. But we can do this. Okay. All right, so we're going to go on? Right? I don't know what time lunch. What time is lunch? 12? 12:30?
Whatever you say.
Well, no, I don't know. Is somebody going to here and warn us?
I'll text Sherry.
Yeah,
She's
okay.
left, so she may be.
Yeah, okay, yeah, all right. All right, so to experience the healing of our nous, right, in our soul, we have to be tough. The kingdom of God suffers violence, and the violent take it by force. So here we are at a women's retreat, and I'm just going to presume that some of you are pretty darn tough, but I'm going to tell you a story about a tough woman that I know. It's my daughter, Sarah. So my 9th out of 10, I have 10 grandchildren, so the 9th of my 10 grandchildren, when he was almost 2 years old, got all sorts of respiratory issues all at once. He got RSV, asthma, just everything. And his heartbeat was 200 beats a minute, and they couldn't bring it down. They took him to Children's Hospital, and they just couldn't. They tried what they did. They couldn't figure out how to solve it. My daughter's in this room, and you know, we're going down there every day, and she never left the room. She never left the room. Used the restroom in the room. She had food brought into the room because she was afraid that if she stepped out and he died, and how would she forgive herself as a mother? Okay, so 7 days now, I'm watching my daughter in this room, and the heart rate is still 200. They can't bring it down at all, and it's creating stress and creating some concern with the staff. So this is about day 7, and the pulmonologist walked out of the room. So I pulled her aside. I said, "Hey, can I just get some kind of update on what's going on with Thomas?" And she looked at me and she goes, "Well, he may not make it, you know." What? No, I never. That option never crossed my mind. It was like one of the worst gut punches I ever had in my life. Right? I couldn't believe it. So that was day 7. On day 10, all of a sudden, they found some kind of concoction, and it worked. 3 days he was home, and now he's 6'2". Hey, Papa, and he's a sophomore in high school, and he's doing fine. But the point is, I'm talking about being tough, right? And so, if you want something badly enough, you're going to do whatever it takes to get that. So it's like my daughter. Like a mama bear. No way am I going to leave the side of this kid. I don't care how much I stink, how greasy my hair is, how uncomfortable I feel. I am not going to give up because I love this guy. So that, honestly, I'm sure if you had heard Father James' story, it would be the same thing. But that was my reality, right? How do you convert a Protestant parish to Orthodoxy? How do you do that? Right? We had 110 families, and all of a sudden I stumbled upon Orthodoxy. Somebody gave me Gilquist's book to read, Becoming Orthodox. I read it. It was my whole journey up to that point, because I just hit a wall where I said, and believe me, our church was just growing like crazy. So I had no reason to quit doing what I was doing. But I hit this wall. I said, this cannot be it. This cannot be the worship that God intended, And I'm not criticizing now. I'm not poo-pooing my past, and I'm not poo-pooing evangelicals. I'm just saying, I hit that wall, and with a lot of our converts, they hit that same kind of wall. The wall is there has to be more, okay? But how do you get people there? And I began to teach and preach, and what's the fruit of that? Well, some people were kind of getting excited, but a lot of people were getting kind of nervous because they didn't know what the heck I was talking about. And we began to make very little itsy-bitsy little baby changes. And some people said, "Man, this is like too Lutheran, or this is Episcopalian, or this is a Roman Catholic, or what is it? I don't know what are you doing?" And they started to leave, right? And so, when you're making this salary and people leave, well, where are they going to make up the difference? Well, you're making the difference in your salary. Your salary's going to get cut, right? So now all of a sudden, I'm saying to myself, let's think about this now. Orthodoxy. Is that a preference or is that a conviction? Right? Well, it was a conviction for me. But what did that mean? I got to teach in a private Christian school. I become a prison chaplain. I referee high school and junior high wrestling. I got 4 kids. My wife stayed home. She was raising the kids. I got to put food on the table. I got to pay bills. Okay, but why would I do that? And it was stressful. Believe me, it was stressful to try and convert an evangelical church into Orthodoxy. But I did that because I believe with all my heart, right, with all my heart and soul, that was the truth. And I wanted it. So if you want something badly enough, you're going to do it. So this is the reality of you in this retreat, in this parish, trying to figure out, do I really want to purify my heart? Because once you come to the place where you go, gosh, you know what? Oh man, Father David, wow, click, click, click. This is it. The purification of my news. This is the thing I have to tap into. If you want that, right, then you're going to do whatever it takes. The kingdom of God suffers violence, and the violent take it by force. It means they will not be deterred from doing what's ever necessary to reach that goal, and the goal is purification. Okay, so step number 1, here we go. We're going to try and purify our hearts. You have to recognize that the church is a hospital. It's a term the Orthodox use a lot, but the church is a hospital. I'm going to tell you a little quick story. There's this Orthodox priest, and he always went like this at the beginning of his homily. And he preached his homily. At the end of the homily, he'd go like that. He did every Sunday. Start like that, preach the homily, Father James, right? And at the end, he goes like that. Finally, the deacon, this years went by, maybe 10 or 12 years, he couldn't stand it. And he says, "Father, please tell me." He goes, why do you start like that? You preach and you end like that? He says, "Well, those are the quote marks." Get it? No, come on. Yeah. You're stealing everybody else's material. Yeah.
The quotation marks.
The quote marks, the quotation marks, yeah. Okay, so what I'm about to tell you, I'm using a lot of material from two books that I think are very critical for you to read, and I would highly encourage you to read these two books. The first one is called Orthodox Psychotherapy. Don't worry, it's not what you think it is. Orthodox Psychotherapy. And the sequel to that, because it builds on that book, is called Spiritual Medicine. So you want to read them in that order. Orthodox Psychotherapy. And do you have a bookstore in this church? Yeah, so maybe you have it in there, perhaps. Yeah. If not, bookstore manager, get a few copies of those.
So what was the second one?
Spiritual Medicine. And they're both by, ready for this? Metropolitan Hierotheos, Hierotheos, Hierotheos. His last name is Vlachos, Vlachos. Okay, so the church is a hospital. What do you need? His last name, Metropolitan Hierotheos, Vlachos. Like Vlachos. Yeah. Okay, so you're going to get well when you are attached to and participate in the life of the church and in its holy mysteries. So as a retreat speaker, I'm trying to tell you how to heal your noose, and I'm going to always point you back to the church, because the place you're going to find healing is church. So it's not you going off on your own, it's not you making all these pilgrimages here and there and sitting under the feet of some, Orthodox, guru of sort. No. It's you being attached to the life of the church. That's how a normal Orthodox person is healed. I realize there's lots of podcasts a person can listen to. There's lots of contemporary books, and I'm not poo-pooing that. Like, I think they all have a place, and people derive a lot of benefit from that. But if you listen to all sorts of podcasts and read all sorts of books, but you are not plugged into and participate in the life of your parish, you will not make any progress in the spiritual life. And by that, I mean that Sundays and feast days are not enough. When Father James and I came into the church, we came in at a very interesting time. And again, I'm not being critical, I'm just saying this is historical reality. The historical reality in this country was that most jurisdictions, Greek, OCA, Serbian, Antiochian, Romanian, whatever it was, they did church on Saturday nights, maybe, if you were lucky, and they did Sunday morning services, and they did feast days. That was it. That was sort of the normal life of any parish in anywhere in USA. And all of a sudden we came in, and we both had the pleasure of befriending a person named Father Alexander Addy. He was quite a character, and I won't go into all his quirks. He was a great guy, man. We love this guy. But the thing that this guy did, especially in the Antiochian Archdiocese, he was maybe the first I'm aware of, that began to do daily services. So we went over to Mount Athos. He had a spiritual father named Father Isaac. He asked him to be a spiritual father. And at that point, Father Addy weighed about 325 pounds. And this spiritual father, he looks at him and he says, "I'm going to be your spiritual father." He goes, "No, fat priest. No, you can't. I'm not going to do it. Can't do it." Right? Wow. Now, listen to me. Does that seem like a wound? Get it? That seems like a wound, right? But that was an incision. And he said to him, "You have to lose weight. You have to lose weight. If you're going to be my spiritual son, I'm giving you this discipline. You've got to lose weight." So he was telling how he used to run with Father Alexander. I used to go to the gym and we'd work out together. I mean, this guy took it so seriously. I never knew him. He was about my size when I knew him. He was, I think, 170 pounds, slim and trim, worked out every day. But the point was, it was an obedience, right? It was an obedience to his spiritual father. And he said, "Okay, I'm going to accept that." But then the second thing he says to him, he goes, "Are you like a typical Antiochian priest?" He goes, "What do you mean by that?" He goes, "When do you do services?" He goes, "Well, Saturdays, Sundays, and feast days." He goes, no. He goes, "If I'm going to be your spiritual father, you're going to do services every day." Now, believe me, nobody did them every day. Nobody. So he came back to Louisville, Kentucky, and Father James and I have both been there. When he was there, I went there one Sunday. It was such a mind blower. It was a church, I don't know, 4 times the size of this. It was 800 or 900 people. It was shocking. And he was sitting there to close that church down. Now just think about that. The church was so struggling. Metropolitan Philip said, I want you to go there, I want you to close it down. But this guy was such a gifted guy that he transformed this church. But the thing that was so transformative was that he built a chapel, and the chapel was probably about half as big as this right here. And everybody had their own card, they could check in, but he began to do daily services even before he built this chapel. And he said sometimes it was only him and the reader, but he did it out of obedience, right? He did orthros every day, he might do liturgy, but pretty soon it caught on. And it caught on to the point where a revival of sorts, we're talking about that revival, this is like an Orthodox revival began to occur in this parish. And so years ago, I'll just tell you a quick story. We have a space in our church that's about 10 feet by 30 feet. And it was 3 classrooms. It was behind where our choir sang. And I said, we don't ever really use these classrooms. Let's turn it into a chapel. So we took 2 of the rooms, we made it into a chapel. We started doing daily services. It became so popular, we popped out the other wall. And now we have, liturgy Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday morning. We have 20 to 30 people in the chapel. It is just transformative. So what I'm saying to you is that when you think about the church as a hospital, like what's the medicine the church is offering you? One of the primary things it's offering you is the services, right? In particular, the Eucharist. And I know Father James has the same desire, right? To do these as many services as is possible. Now, I'm saying that because, I live in Washington State, and there's lots of reasons people move out of Washington State. One of them is weather, but the other one is our government, right? The other one is the liberal politics in our state. And our state is probably 2nd or 3rd to California and New York. It's just really liberal. It's like as dark blue as you can get. And so what ended up happening was that in the midst of all this COVID craziness, which I'm unapologetically, I never shut down. I just wouldn't do it, and I didn't care what consequences we suffered legally. Forget it. The church is staying open, and we can handle this. But we had several people move away, and they said, we gotta get out of here. So they moved to Texas, they moved to Florida, they moved to North Carolina, they moved to Iowa, they moved to, and you know what ends up happening? I told them, I said, just giving you a warning. Just giving you a warning. Life, Orthodox life isn't like it is here. We're all going, Father, name it, nobody's doing the services, and we don't have it. I said, well, I told you, right? So I don't know, was it worth sticking it out in Washington? I'm just saying here, you got a gold mine, right? And you got the potential for this to be really a gold mine. And if Father James says, you know what, I want to start doing service, etc., don't go, oh, come on, Father James, isn't it? No, stop it. You give thanks that you got a priest that wants to do this kind of stuff. Because the healing you're going to experience is in the context of the life of a church. Because the church really is a hospital. Sundays and feast days are not enough. We're not about nominalism in the Orthodox Church. Really, we're about maximalism. What's the maximum we can do? And I'm not being unrealistic now. Listen, I have 4 kids. I got 10 grandkids. People play sports. I've got 2 girls in my church. They're so tough. They're brothers from our parish. Both, they got 1st and 2nd state at Arlington. And it's the only time Arlington ever won the wrestling championship in the state of Washington. But now, their sisters are tough, right? And they have girls wrestling up where we are. And today, both these girls are in the semifinals, right? So they have a chance to actually win state this afternoon and this evening. Okay, but the point is that, if you've got situations that arise, Father James doesn't expect you to be in church every day, and I don't expect people to be in church every day. But our responsibility as a priest is like a clinic. Like if a clinic was open on Saturdays and Sundays, whenever else the doctor felt like opening it up, what would that all be about? It'd be ridiculous, because people are sick constantly. They have need constantly. But if a church can be open, maybe not every day, but given the nature of the staff, but perhaps almost every day, then it always gives you an opportunity to come and partake of this spiritual medicine. And so experience, right? We're talking about an experiential relationship with Jesus Christ. So you say, what is it that separates orthodoxy from non-orthodoxy? It separates orthodoxy from Roman Catholicism or from evangelical or mainline Protestantism. And the answer is experience, right? It's not about believism. It's not about, do I believe the right things about Jesus Christ and somehow now I am saved. It's that I've experienced Jesus Christ, that I've come into union with Jesus Christ. Elder Zechariah from Essex, he expounds on St. Silouan and he's teaching about the enlargement of the heart. So I'm going to try and give you a little, now let's say this is a person's heart, and it's open just a little bit here, just a little bit. And he says, and there's the grace of God. Now remember I said about the things that attract the grace of God, doing things that repel the grace of God. So in developing that concept, he talks about how our heart can actually be enlarged. And when I am obedient, I'm receiving the holy mysteries, I'm going to confession, all of a sudden that hole gets bigger, that space gets bigger. That the grace of God begins to fill that space, not just a little space now it fills that space. And he says, and I continue to pursue God, I continue to read, I continue to humble myself, and whoosh, it even gets bigger. And now the grace of God is filling that. The enlargement of the heart. So you think about the purification of the heart. What does that mean, right? It means that, it's not so much that there's more Holy Spirit, but it means that I begin to experience the presence of the Holy Spirit in a much more dynamic way than I did when I was a nominalist, when I was a minimalist, when I did the least I could do. What's the least, let's see, what's the least I can do and still consider myself to be an Orthodox Christian? Shockingly, there's a lot of people think that way. Now, they never tell you that. They never say, well, Father David, I've been thinking, what's the least I can do? But if you look at their life, right, and if you see how they actually live their lives in terms of an Orthodox context, you realize that. But now listen, the reverse is true. So I'm seeking God, I'm involved in receiving all this spiritual medicine, but now I'm rejecting that, and I'm hardening my heart, and I don't want to ask forgiveness, and I'm not being kind, I'm being stingy, I'm not caring for the poor. And you see what happens, all of a sudden, the heart shrinks, right? It's a reduction of the heart. So what we're interested in now is the enlargement of the heart. Okay. We've already noted that the illness that we're battling is the darkening of the nous, and the cure to that malady is the illumination of the nous. So here's the word psychotherapy, and you take note of this if you're taking notes. Metropolitan Erotheos, in his book Orthodox Psychotherapy, we translate the word psycho as what? What's the Greek word? Psyche. And you know what psyche is? Soul. Right? So Orthodox psychotherapy then becomes what? Soul therapy. Yeah, exactly. That's what we're talking about. So that word got hijacked from us, right? And so you have modern psychotherapists, and they analyze you, and they're Freudian, or they're Jungian, or they're Skinnerites, or whatever they are, and sometimes they send you to a psychiatrist, and so now it's not just talk therapy, it's medicine and all, and the whole thing has gotten hijacked from us. But this is our word, this is a church word, right? Psyche is soul. So when he's writing this book, he's talking about the therapy of the soul. An Orthodox therapist is a priest. So Father James is a therapist. He's a psychotherapist, right? He's a psyche therapist. I'm a psyche therapist. I'm a therapist of the soul. So if you go to a priest, if you go to a Yerodasa, right, for women, all of these people are therapists. And their concern is what? Their concern is the illumination of your nous. Now, you may come to them because your marriage has fallen apart. You may come to them because you got a kid that's going off half-cocked, or you can't figure out how to gain control of your family. Or you may come to them because you're depressed and you don't know how to get out of this depression. I mean, all of these things, they all manifest themselves. But ultimately, what is the therapist's concern? What's my concern as a priest? My concern is your soul. I've got to try and figure out what's going on in your soul. Now, it takes a while. I've never gone to a therapist, but I probably should. But the people that have, and sometimes people, I see a pattern where people come to me and they go, yeah, we've gone to like 5. I go, you've gone to 5 therapists? Like, what? Okay, something's not working here. Okay, no, I'm not poo-pooing therapy altogether. I've got a couple of therapists in my church. But, you know, the point is, when you begin to go to somebody, they don't know you at all, right? So you tell your life story, and then they start to ask questions. They go, do you think we ought to bring your spouse in? No, I don't. I'm not ready for that. Okay, but then at some point, should I get to know your spouse? And then, same thing's true when you come to the Orthodox Church, right? Like these people right here that were received in today. All they've done is a life confession with Father James. Boom, that's their first. Great. Your first experience of Orthodoxy is your entire life. I remember when I made my life confession, oh man. You know, when you're 42 and you come into the church, it's a lot different than being 22 or being 12. Because you've got a lot of history in your life that you have to confess. But the point is that when you start to go to confession, the priest doesn't know you at all. And you don't know him. And people are kind of afraid, because one of the shocking things about becoming Orthodox is you actually have to bare your soul to somebody, right? You know, Father Thomas Hopko, was he there when you were there? Yeah. Father Hopko, I already love Father. I'll just tell you a funny story about Father Hopko. He was so renowned that if he was to speak here, you'd have 400 people here, right? I mean, everybody drive for miles around. So anyway, he came to a parish life conference, and I had to lead the Bible study. And there he is. I go, oh shoot, are you kidding me? I lead a Bible study, and Father Thomas Hopko is sitting here. So, strategist that I am, I thought, I've got to get this guy talking because I know he likes to talk. So, so now I had to do this about 45-minute session. And so, anyway, I opened the first question, and I said, Father Thomas, I go, what do you think about that? Boom, he took the whole rest of the class. Okay. But the point is that you don't know a person. And so a person in the Orthodox Church, they don't know you as a therapist. They're not sure they can trust you. They have to open their heart to you. That's a scary thing. And you know, and sometimes you've got to find the right therapist, right? Because not everybody is equal in therapy. But what I'm saying is that the priest or the father confessor that you go to is interested in healing your news. And a byproduct of that may be a better marriage, better relationships in your family, control over passions that are overcoming you. But that's his concern, right? Is the healing of your news. There's a hymn in the church we sing. It says, resurrect our mortified noose as you resurrected Lazarus. So that's what's going on, that our noose is dead. And hopefully, by the grace of God, right, it's not just the therapist, but by the grace of God and by applying the right medicine, all of a sudden that noose resurrects. So, Mr. Paul, what time are we going to eat, by the way? Nobody seemed to know the answer to that.
Whenever you're ready.
Yeah, we're not ready.
Yeah.
You ready?
They're ready.
Okay, yep. Okay, we'll start right there. Perfect. That's a perfect place to stop. Okay?